She was attacked by what appears to be essentially a robot.
Well, hello there. Hello and welcome. It's your buddy, Admiral Teag, and I'm here with my pal, the mighty Snail. How you doing, Snail?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing okay, but after watching that episode of Loki, I'm not looking forward to next week or really re-engaging with the whole idea of what went on today. But here we go. I give this episode a 0 out of 10, and I was found it to be at odds with its own history, at odds with the show's history, at odds with the events, and talking about time travel in a way that really feels like these guys bit off more than they could chew with this one, doesn't it? What did you think?
I think that this episode really showed that they have no real idea what they're doing, or I can't tell anymore what they're trying to do. I wish I knew.
I feel it's purposely trying to be confusing and counting on the amount of time and lack of memorability of last season wasn't memorable. It was just another chain of events. And what we got this week was, again, just mostly a chain of events. It wasn't as much of a story as I would have wanted it to be. So this week, Miss Minutes is back on the scene, and it's the voice of Batman the Animated Series Harley Quinn, Tara Strong. You're more familiar with her than I am, but she's pretty good as far as voice acting goes. No
She
problem
is
with
one
her
of the
performance.
best, one of the absolute best.
Well known in the field, and we've seen her, and she seems to have conspicuously stayed out of trouble. And we see her character there, the little sundial. I don't know what you want to call it. The orange colored clock face. Yeah. And in this episode, she's a little inconsistent, which is, I guess, supposed to be clever, where she becomes black and white after this. And on and off through this episode, the episode is filtered in black and white. I thought editing and pacing were a real mess, but here and there, we had a couple of decent shots. Like there was a couple of well-composed shots, especially when we show McDonald's related stuff. And we had one real good shot where we sort of did a Spielberg shot on the dock when Kang, who gets reintroduced in this episode, and Ravana, who gets reintroduced in this episode, get together with Miss Minutes, who reemerges in this episode, and they're down getting on a riverboat. We go to 1893. We go to the Chicago World's Fair. Electricity is something that these people would have been somewhat familiar with, as far as they should have seen some of it by now if they live in Chicago. It's been in New York for 13 years at the time of the show. New York's fully electrified for like 5 years at the time of the show. So they should have been able to see some streets in Chicago electrified. So we have a time travel show unaware of history, but we put a filter on the lens on and off for a while there. And sometimes it looks okay, but I don't know. What did you think of the pacing and the editing?
The editing is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It is a professionally done job. There's nothing wrong with it. The pacing, it doesn't matter because it does nothing. And if they're going for nothing, the most positive things I'm going to say about this, it wasn't a McDonald's episode. There you go.
It was nice to get out of that McDonald's. I didn't think we would. I really didn't think we would. And when we go to the Chicago World's Fair, first we stop off at the TVA. We see young Kang getting this book from the TVA people. Like they go back and here's Renslayer. She beat up Owen Wilson last year, and she gives Kang this piece of information. I wish I could nail the visual.
It's a bit hard.
Kang. Yeah, you know what? Things happen rather quickly. That's why, editing and pacing was like, maybe I'm wrong to blame the editor. Maybe nothing could have fixed this pacing problem that the show had. And I guess what I mean by that is I feel the show rushed right into things only to then stop and mark time. So it didn't say build up to an event. Like we fast forwarded to something happening. And then the show kind of went with brinksmanship, and all of a sudden we were in no hurry because we could rewind time. But then when it would help to rewind time, we totally are unaware that we can do it.
And I'm kind of flabbergasted that Loki hardly ever uses any kind of power. Hardly.
Uses it twice in this episode, and it's a relief that he seems to know how to use it. But the casual way they just beam in and out, for lack of a better term, they basically have this technology that beams them anywhere they want in time and space. You walk through an orange opaque kind of doorway, and you come out wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
It's hardest in a transporter in an iPhone. It looks like an iPhone, although everyone's is a little different. Like back at the TVA, one person has like a flip phone version of it, but it seems like Ravana, Renslayer, which they just love the name Ren. I think it's Scottish for king. So Kingslayer, the female time court judge from last year. So you wouldn't know this having not seen last season. But she deletes people all day. She's like, never found anyone innocent, she says at one point, and she judges you on your fate. Like, it's like a kangaroo court that they have to put you through before they delete you from the timeline and feed you to the dragon at the end of time. And I looked up the dragon's name. It's Aloyth. I don't know if that means anything. Alioth. I don't know if that brings anything back to your mind from myths and stuff. Because I guess we said it, but I'm not sure it's on this version of the edit. You're from Denmark. So these myths are more familiar to you and were something that you were taught kind of in school, right?
Yeah. Well, so I'm in school, and I had a more interested in the Viking era through archaeology of it rather than mythology. But I do know quite a bit, and it doesn't mean anything to me. Of course, I don't know everything. But one thing I just found out is that Ren in Chinese means humanity, humanness, goodness, benevolence, or love. She's a love slayer.
She could be a Kingslayer or a love slayer, or love is king. Who knows? It's a mystery. It's just a mystery.
But it's a mystery, and I don't like mysteries. Give me a bellyache, and I got a beauty right now.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense. The chain of events in this show seems to be that we get somewhere, we find out that we need to make an adjustment in time just to show that we can fine tune where we are in time. We show like their time travel control is excellent. Excellent.
Oh, they got it down.
They go to the
better than a DeLorean.
It's like dialing a phone. It's just like you're going to connect to the number you dial, and that's the only place you're going to go. So if you know the number, you're set. And they've got a phone book. They're set. They know exactly where and how to rewind and speed up time. So the episode shows us this in a joke early on when they're like, we're too early, and they jump forward, and then the fair is going on, and they're at the 1893 World's Fair, I think they say, in Chicago. And it's very populous. It's dense. They're walking around from one exhibit to the next. And the set is fairly decent, but they're not saying a lot. They're not doing a lot to advance the story. And then we just sort of go into one place after we find our first clue. After about a minute, we say what we need. We run into it. Then we sort of mess around and waste time for 2 or 3 minutes. Then we act on what we knew. The next thing happens, and then we again will pause. So after a couple of herky-jerky moments, we end up in an exhibition at the Chicago World's Fair, and it's Kang on stage, and he's sort of styled like Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. He's styled after him, and he's acting sort of like an eccentric genius, and they've imbued him with a speech impediment and sort of like really Jar Jar Binks-ish sort of body movement is what came to mind to me. What did you think of Kang and him as a threat or potential ally or his power level?
He seems very benign to me. I don't get the Jar Jar thing. And if you're going to give him a stutter, you can't do it. It would take too much time of the episode to get through a real stutter. I've met some people with significant stutter, and it takes time for them to say anything. So for the sake of time, they've cut down on the stutter to be very minor.
Or they're not illustrating it right, because what happens is he'll speak a few words and then he'll just he won't have a verbal hiccup, but he'll just simply pause while his brain catches up to his mouth. It's really weird. And then he'll just start delivering again, and then it's like it's just halting.
There is neurology. There is a condition that makes you lose what you're about to say and then pause and then start again. It's like the brain resets a lot. They could. I
Yeah,
don't
that
think
happens
it's
to me a lot, especially when I watch this show. Did you feel like the show? Let me ask you this one: did you feel like the show was purposely confusing when it could have been a little more clear what was going on? They just
I don't think anything in this show is really confusing. To be very honest about it, I have to be fair. I don't think it's confusing. Everything is right in front of you. There is no information that I feel that I don't get. It's just so dumb. It is dumbed down so that people with injuries, a lot of places can follow, and that hurts
yeah.
me.
And also, like, if you acted this way at work, you get in a lot of trouble. Like, basically, this one gets away with it's sort of making fun of this guy's disability, you know. It's using it as a joke, and you would get fired if you were to take advantage of someone or mock them for it. But the show's position seems to be that the fact that he's not able to speak properly is funny, and
How dare you?
you know what I mean?
To me, that's a non-issue. It really is, and maybe that's because I live where I live, and I don't know. It's just a non-issue to me at all. What is a really bigger issue to me in this episode, and this is the only thing that confuses me, not confuses me, but makes me think a bit about this. The TikTok, I have to say this. It has to be in here.
Minutes.
No, the tech talk when he is
the
at
tech
the
talk.
Yeah.
I thought you said the TikTok. I'm like, huh?
The tech
All right,
talk.
go ahead.
Yeah,
right. The techno babble.
Yeah, as I was talking with you about earlier, it wasn't until about 50 years ago, I think, that when you said a win-win situation was something that everybody would understand. It was, in psychology at least, quite advanced until 50 years ago when people started to understand this. And the things he's talking about, no one would understand anything of what he was saying up there with all the technobabble.
Right. And not to, when they're not talking technobabble, they're talking in deep colloquialisms. They say things like bless your heart, which is a passive aggressive way of telling someone that they're confused and should ask for guidance.
Yeah.
But if you weren't from America, you wouldn't know that. Yeah. We had to spend a couple of minutes just unpacking how they use the English language strictly as Americans in this show, which stars like an English guy, you know? Their way of saying things is deliberately imprecise, and they seem to have an aversion to getting to any real point. So I felt it was purposely confusing, and the reason why this show is less confusing to you than it is to me is because I watched last season and you didn't.
Yeah.
We're spawning off a new set of events as though the way last season ended, a lot of stuff happened off screen, and he's in conflict with these people, and everyone knows everything. When we left off last season, everyone was on the same page in Friends, and Loki alone knew the information that would have had him at odds with them. So the show still has it within its grasp to go jump back to the moment before the show starts this season and go back to the end of last season and say, my gosh, we just all experienced the time branch. And whoo, good thing that didn't happen, and then roll credits for the end of the season. We can still do that because what happened didn't match up with what we saw. And in a show about time travel where you can rewind and change events and you keep saying that, when you're not consistent about your show's past and the show's chain of events, I find that it makes for a really confusing narrative and a narrative that's at odds with itself and hostile to making sense.
About making sense, I have to get this also. The intro to the show with Loki and all these letters and hieroglyphs and whatnot, it still reminds me so much of Sherlock Holmes, more modern shows. And it doesn't make sense to me because they're not discovering anything. They're not trying to solve any kind of mystery because mystery is non-existent unless the mystery is something they're not going to tell you is a mystery. Thus, you can't make any kind of theory upon it.
And the show
And that
stops
is,
over a couple of times to say, it makes sense, but you can't follow it. So let's keep going with this story. There's
yeah.
like 2 moments like that in this episode. Ravana Renslayer says it to Kang, or whatever name he has, Victor Timely in this timeline. She says to Victor Timely in a roundabout way, she says, it makes sense, you just can't follow it. And he's supposed to be the smartest person who ever lived. And he's invented stuff back in 1893 that we can't even use yet. It's a little silly, steampunky, and has vacuum tube sort of technology, but it's beyond what we can do. And he's like selective in using it. And the one thing the show is consistent about is if you say you want to be a partner with him, he immediately gets a little bit nervous and immediately will
ditches
try
you.
to. Yeah, he does. He will not be a partner with anyone.
Yeah.
Which I guess is supposed to make him somewhat like Thomas Edison.
Maybe.
Like Thomas Edison famously was like taking all the credit, famously was like kind of like
Oh yeah.
an avaricious guy, was famously sort of mean with the competition, famously drove other people away, famously blew up that elephant with the electricity that his competitors were marketing to make it seem dangerous.
Yep.
Avariciously invents the electric chair to make his competitors look bad. He uses the other form of generating electricity to make the electric chair to make his seem safer. And I guess what happens in this show is Kang is like Thomas Edison plus Stephen Hawking, and he's a little bit more than even that. Like he's got like a 2050 tech level, it seems already. He's ahead of us. And he's constrained by what the materials he can get his hands on and what he can do. But then the show just continues to be unaware of history because when they leave the fair to go back to his home, they jump on a riverboat, and boarding that boat is the lone really good shot of the show. I thought it was a really good running shot. Like it reminded me of Spielberg, where we home in on a bag and then we pull out again and we go down the length of the dock to show the ship on one side and the row of houses on the other on the shore of where Chicago meets the lake. They get on this boat to go across the lake to Wisconsin, where he says the taxes are cheaper. I Googled immediately because I knew offhand from just knowing, but yeah, he's 40 years ahead of time. This character might not live to be old enough to have to worry about moving away for income taxes that start after World War I.
Well, income tax, I think. Yeah, it was about World War One. It started in England too, and
It's a
later.
little after. In America, income taxes might have been passed before, but they can't start effectively collecting them, I think, until about 1928. And they're not a thing till after World War I. And even then, it's like people who like, people like the always popular issue of taxes. But I mean, back to Loki for a moment. Wow. By the end of this episode, we've had Sylvie show up. Sorry, I keep getting the actress's name and the character's name confused. We have Sylvie show up a few times with her sword, and she's got Kang on his knees, like begging for mercy a couple of times. One time she uses the Force basically to throw him across the room and hold him to the wall. She has a sword. She like has telekinesis. She's essentially a Jedi.
Well, she's a very powerful Jedi.
She's a very powerful
And
Sith.
she's a great Jedi. She doesn't hold her position either way. She just knows this is bad. I'm going to stop this from her point of view. Another Star Wars joke right there, right?
Right. She's a very impulsive person, and she does what she thinks is right from her point of view immediately. And sometimes that involves things that don't make sense, like lying in wait for 200 years while some event happens and then attacking. And no one uses time travel to do something like an encounter starts and you realize you're outnumbered. No one pulls out their time travel device to rewind time and come back with backup, even if that means doubling your own self, because you can do that. And it doesn't seem to make sense why, we can kill someone and it has no consequences. In this episode, we see Kang's dead body at the very end, sort of wiping away the events of this episode and rebooting back to the end of last season, but only for one character. And then Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius are just they're in. I didn't enjoy this episode, and it was like sludge. It was so hard to understand. As I look at my notes, his delivery is bad. We roll out new tech in the form of the loom. Kang is an idiot with a terrible speech problem. He uses the term the loom just out of nowhere. I guess we heard it last week, but who would know? This show is not memorable. Renslayer's just there. We find him. It takes 17 minutes to watch the two villains just to start talking about their aspirations. And then, we get the only real clues to his personality. They haggle over how much it would cost to buy his technology. And while the price is still going up, he accepts an offer, which is not that smart, but he gets $1,000. And we find out right there he won't be partners with anyone. Finally, they jump on that riverboat and head to Wisconsin for tax purposes. And somewhere in there, we've just got him, being Kang, ditching Renslayer by dropping that boat off the riverboat and just leaving her behind.
It's a lifeboat. Let's be clear. It's a lifeboat.
Sorry, it's a lifeboat. Yeah, they're sitting in a lifeboat, which we've seen in other movies and stuff. I guess it's a little romantic. It's supposed to show they have something. And the one normal moment, he does take her hand, and it made sense and felt kind of good. And then we stepped away to the other story.
She says the P word. Let's not forget.
She says, let's be partners.
Exactly.
He takes her hand, but then she says, we could be partners. And he kind of gives her another look again. And then we step away to the other characters. And the next thing that we know, when we step back to these people, we've got a confusing situation where she's just asleep. We see the lifeboat drop from the back of the boat crossing the lake, the riverboat, for whatever you want. Let's call it a riverboat. Yeah. And it's not, that riverboat's not right. It doesn't have an outrigger paddle on the side. It doesn't have a paddle wheel in the back. It's powered by screws that I don't know you would have in 1893. It's too advanced. It's inconsistent.
I think you would.
I don't think we had screws by 1893 that were functional for a river or a lake kind of boat. It's real debatable. Bottom line is, they don't have a paddle wheel on the back of the boat because he needs to drop her off the boat. We don't have a paddle wheel on the side of the boat because wouldn't make sense. And also, we don't have people who know much about history writing a time travel show. So everything that happened in the 1800s happens at once. The War of 1812, the telephone, electricity, and the Spanish-American War were weeks apart to the mind of this show.
Okay, so in 1840 and 1841, they used screws. They were invented. Newcastle, England.
Right.
There you go.
So that's the tech level. We're a half century outside of screws being invented, at least practical ones. And he's got vacuum tube technology that can make a lightning storm. And I guess we're going to find out it can help you travel time. At any rate, after he ditches her, he's on a powered boat. We see he's making steady headway, and she starts rowing, following the boat on the river. We know there's no way a human can keep up, even with an 1893 boat. So it's been established she's just a human. She's going to eventually lose a lot of ground, which doesn't seem to matter because she can time travel. So why not take out the time travel device and try to time travel?
Also, you can also travel in space, right? So both space and time. So you can go anywhere with a little handheld device. It wouldn't be a problem for her to go anywhere. In that boat, she would just get back on the deck of the riverboat. I think, right?
I'm not sure, but the next time we catch up with them is we've then moved the plot forward a little more, finally, incrementally, after about 46 minutes. And then we have Miss Minutes sort of tell Kang how she feels about him. And it's the same thing from Solo. She wants to be human. She wants a relationship with Kang because he's like a god. So we've turned the HAL 9000 into a stalker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stalky HAL 9000. And it's another one that just doesn't quite make total sense. And we could wonder all day long about what they were trying to say. Miss Minutes is acting like Phoebe Waller-Bridge's droid in the Solo movie when it wanted to get with Lando. She wants something more with Kang. And there we have our Miss Minutes, just so you guys can see her. That's Tara Strong. She's with Mark Hamill. You can see by looking at Mark that this a little while back, but she still essentially is able to deliver that same performance and that same voice. She does a good job, but what she's saying is just kind of nonsense. Then we have Sylvie kind of show up right hot in the heels of Loki and Mobius. People talk about stuff for a long time. We get Kang on his knees, and for about 2-3 minutes, we just talk while he's at the edge of her sword. And then she just decides not to destroy him. And then sort of like we kick Renslayer through a hole in time after she kind of like Sylvie just basically physically dominates everyone, and people end up where she feels like having them be. And at the end of this episode, it's hard to feel like anything much happened. All we did was introduce a new character and show that he had the power of electricity.
And
he was pretty smart.
Sympathy. He's good.
Yeah, he's sympathetic.
Yeah, he gets sympathy from people, even silly.
I didn't find his acting to be terrible. I thought that he was used badly, and I also thought that they were trying to use the way he delivered his dialogue and his perceived speech impediment, or the fact that he couldn't. It was weird. He's supposed to be super smart, but he can outspeak how fast, or he can speak faster than he can think, but he speaks very slowly. It was strange. It was a strange way to show he's a genius.
Well, I
don't know what to tell you.
So, right. I mean, he also brings up concepts that he shouldn't be able to. He got that TVA manual. I don't know how much that helps him. I don't know what's in that manual. And what he comes up with in terms of technology is nothing short of astounding, really.
Yeah, because honestly, all he gets is like their instruction manual that assumes that you know the specifics. It's just like, we are the Time Variance Society. You have to assume it's a riff on what they said last year. But then all of a sudden, he's designed all of these things out of it, reverse engineering them out of hearing about them. And this is the sort of magical thinking I saw in Strange New Worlds, where people had a powerful telescope on one planet, and they saw a ship go to warp. And what they would have interpreted, well, you and I would have interpreted that is that the ship disappeared. But what they determined was that the ship must have gone light speed.
Exactly.
So they built a warp drive, and they managed to, they cracked it on their first try. They had it like 8 months later. The show tells us how long, by mistake.
Well, that's how you do space travel. You see other people do it, and then you instantly know how.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I watched that. It's exactly like when I watched that guy hit that World Series home run, and the next day I went to the batting cage and I just sprayed the ball all over the place because I was awesome. You know how that works.
See?
Yeah.
It's a real
monkey
thing.
See, monkey do. Yeah, no, they loaded and fired Chekhov's gun on that one. So we thank everybody who joined us for the show, Loki, and everyone who joined the channel for it. We're committed to continuing to follow it. I have to admit, I watched this one twice. I found it to be deliberately confusing, and I don't want to commit to too much of what it said because the show keeps buying back what happened last week, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Not completely, but enough to cast everything in doubt because you don't know what's going to happen and what isn't. My best advice to anyone trying to understand this show would be subtitles and watch the previously on because that's all that counts. All other events of the show are out the window. It's only the implications of the previously on if they give you one. And that would be about it. Bad use of music, too. There was a lot of times when people were talking about stuff that was really scientific and thinky, and they just didn't use music well. So I don't know. I guess -2 again is my mark. You gave it a solid 2. We're apart. I guess that averages out to a 0.
Well, no. Plus,
Loki episode 2. It's a season 2 episode 3 is kind of a wash, and I bet you could. You might not be able to skip this one, but boy, is it punishingly slow.
It is the very embodiment of Netflix and chill. You sit down, you hope you can grab the girl a bit, get some smoochies, and nothing happens.
They Netflix and chill in that lifeboat.
No, she needs to do something too, so she's going to scoot over and smooch with you because nothing happens, and you can smooch.
And by the way, she shows up about 2 minutes late to make good on her plan, although she has infinite time rewinds. And when she's at somebody's mercy, but not too closely in danger, she doesn't grab her time tech to rewind 2 more minutes. So no one's using their time travel stuff to the best of their ability. One of the most convenient shows I've ever seen. We'll be back next week with episode 4. This review runs about 30 minutes and took about 2 hours to figure out after we watched the show because the show was so deliberately confusing and at odds with itself. And I think it says a lot. The person who didn't watch season 1 had an easier time digesting it. Snell, you looking forward to episode 4 next week?
I have diarrhea.
So do the writers, and so do it's time to stop this down. I mean, you know what? Come on, episode 3. Oh, this is all I can say.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
I'm Admiral Teag, and this is my buddy, the Mighty Snell. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone who joined us, starting with the first Loki review. We're going to see it through till the end. We're halfway there. Thank you, and have a great week. Hit those like and follow buttons if you haven't already. It's your buddy, Admiral Teag.